Hollywood loves to be meta, and there's a long and glorious history of films referencing filmmaking and indeed other films, but what Hollywood loves even more is being remarkably clever with those references. From George Lazenby's "This never happened to the other fella" quip in On Her Majesty's Secret Service to John Travolta remarking on Hollywood's tendency to make unbelievable, unremarkable shit in Swordfish just a year after releasing Battlefield Earth. It's self-congratulatory, a little bit groan-inducing, and yes, quite smug. I'm Ben from What Culture, and here are 10 incredibly smug movie references you might have missed. Number 10. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the Fight Club t-shirt. Some films get tripped up by their attempts to mythologize their actors, and that can restrict the artist from offering a strong performance. When a director decides to adopt that agenda, however, he's basically signing away his ability to get anything out of his lead other than a backslapping showing. It's just not the best way to inspire commitment in a role. And that's exactly what happens in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which, while an enjoyable if slightly silly romp, could have been an awful lot better if Brad Pitt wasn't on autopilot for most of it. And the cause? Well, it all comes down to that mythologizing. As for some reason, supporting actor Adam Brody turned up wearing a Fight Club t-shirt, paying homage to Pitt's best role, while also reminding everyone how much worse Mr. and Mrs. Smith is. Number 9. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Ed Wood. In a sequence that most watchers won't have noticed the implications of, Johnny Depp's man-child Wonka walks past a room full of pink sheep and preempts any questions by saying he'd rather not talk about this one to his collected audience. To the uninitiated, it's just another indication of Wonka's madness, but it's actually a nod to infamously awful director and one of Tim Burton's idols, Ed Wood, who was also played by Depp in Burton's biopic and who was a cross-dresser with a penchant for pink woolen sweaters. While it's clearly meant as an affectionate reference to Burton's former anti-hero as well as an acknowledgement of Depp's previous experience playing unstable characters, it needs too much explaining and comes off as a little self-indulgent. Number 8. Cedar Rapids. Clay's Omar impression. Partway through Cedar Rapids starring Ed Helms, one of his leading actors, Isaiah Whitlock, offers a rather blatant acknowledgement of his most famous and most successful role. To scare off some thugs, Whitlock, who played Senator Clay Davis in HBO's The Wire, and whose character is an unashamed fan of the show, in a rather "oh come on" move, offers an impression of Wire co-star Michael K. Williams, who played Omar Little. This might be a rather indulgent move by the scriptwriters, but at least they had Whitlock mimic Omar rather than simply trotting out his own character's catchphrase. Number 7. Die Hard with a Vengeance. McClane's retirement. It's almost hard to remember, but not so long ago, Die Hard sequels were something to be celebrated rather than laughed at. Nowadays, some might even call it a shit franchise for wankers, #shit franchise for wankers. Thankfully, the third entry was one of the better sequels, and part of that comes down to the writing, which produced a tighter, funnier script. Returned from retirement, McClane is questioned as to how he's been spending his time, to which he responds he's been smoking cigarettes and watching Captain Kangaroo. On the surface, the line works because it implies that McClane is at a loss since retirement and feels redundant enough to not do anything with his free time. But that ignores the rather smug reference to the Statler brothers' Flowers on the Wall, whose lyrics inspired the response. So rather than just answer for McClane, the script has Bruce Willis respond to the question as well, referencing Pulp Fiction, which came out a year before Vengeance and which famously featured the hairless wonder singing lines from the same song. Number 6. Tango and Cash. Rambo is a Andrei Konchalovsky's excellent buddy cop movie opens with a bang, with old slurring Sly Stallone in hot pursuit of a big-time drug shipment which the bumbling local police force claim is merely a harmless gas tanker. After an angry outburst for working outside his jurisdiction and needlessly pulling over the tanker, Stallone's supremely cool Tango responds to the accusation that he thinks he's Rambo in typically cool fashion.
Rambo is a
before confidently firing his weapon into the tanker to reveal that it is full of cocaine, as he suspected. Aside from the obvious questions relating as to how Tango could possibly have seen a Rambo film when it couldn't actually exist in a universe in which Stallone isn't an actor, it's a great moment, even if it's a moment delivered with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Number 5. The Last Action Hero. The Terminator. Along with Scream and The Cabin in the Woods, John McTiernan's superlative Last Action Hero probably stands as the finest meta film of all time, thanks to his conscious celebration of generic conventions and a very clever commitment to deconstructing them. Plus, in amongst the numerous meta references is one scene that introduced Schwarzenegger's Jack Slater to a poster of one of the actor's own films, but with a difference. In a video store, Slater clocks an advertisement for The Terminator, starring Sylvester Stallone. So why is it smug exactly? Well, the line is very obviously a backhanded compliment directed at Stallone, especially as the script carries the extra punch of calling it his
best performance ever.
Number 4. Out of Sight, Gecko's mugshot. Long before George Clooney was considered Hollywood royalty, he made Out of Sight with Steve Soderbergh, a fast-paced and hugely underloved drama that still stands as some of his finest work. As you might expect, he was on strong, charming form opposite J-Lo as a career criminal called Jack Foley, who gets a little too involved with the US Marshal he kidnaps. At one point during the film, J-Lo's character Karen Sisco is watching a news report warning of Foley's escape, which shows his mugshot. It doesn't even look like him, she grumbles, and the film moves on without a second glance. But there's a reason it doesn't look like him. It's because it isn't. The image that flashes up on screen is in fact the mugshot of Clooney's character Seth Gecko from Dusk Till Dawn, which came out 2 years before Out of Sight and which obviously appealed to Soderbergh enough to warrant the cringeworthy reference. Number 3. Maverick, Lethal Weapon. Maverick might not be the most celebrated of Mel Gibson's career moves or indeed Richard Donner's, but the Western comedy does make for reasonable viewing. Sadly though, it's never quite good enough to get over the decision to reference Donner and Gibson's more famous collaboration in a way that has now relegated the film to a footnote to that reference. Rather than simply introducing the third Lethal Weapon collaborator, Danny Glover, as a cameo as a reserved nod to the film, Donner instead chose to bring him in as a bank robber who then tries his best and succeeds in making everyone wish they were actually watching Lethal Weapon. As Maverick and the bank robber face off, they clearly recognize one another, and as if that wasn't enough of a nod, the Lethal Weapon score appears to hammer the reference home a little more, before Danny Glover unnecessarily wheels out his "I'm too old for this shit" catchphrase just to make sure we don't miss his obvious longing for the vastly superior franchise. Number 2. Charlie's Angels, E.T. Of all the problems and missteps associated with McGee's big screen take on the Charlie's Angels property, the decision to hurtle a naked Drew Barrymore down a hillside was probably one of the least complained about. And in a rather self-satisfied move, the room that Barrymore is forced to break into after her fall, with just an inflatable flower to cover her nakedness, is in fact the same living room that appears in her most famous and far less naked early performance, Steven Spielberg's E.T. The set is the same house used for E.T., and if you look closely, the boys she interrupts when she enters have a bowl of Reese's Pieces between them on the floor as another nod to the location and Barrymore's early career. And if that wasn't enough, there's a poster of the same film carefully placed just in view to really make certain that us idiots get the message. Number 1. Be Kind Rewind. Sigourney Weaver saves Ghostbusters. Be Kind Rewind is a curious animal. It's not the most memorable of movies, but it is one of Jack Black's finest roles. The film also has a tender message under its hood and a central concept of Sweding movies that's both very clever and digestible for fans. Obviously, the idea of remaking movies and renting them out under the pretense that they are in fact the originals is both unlawful and attracts the attentions of said law. In this film, in the shape of Sigourney Weaver, a studio power and court bailiff. She insists that they are in violation of copyright and all of their Sweded stock must be destroyed. The decision to cast Weaver in this role, considering one of the Sweded films is Ghostbusters, feels like an obvious nod to her role in that film, as she seeks to protect her own interests in the original project. It's a hugely tongue-in-cheek moment and could be deemed a red flag provocation to the Ghostbusters rights holders if it wasn't for the fact that the references were thankfully authorized. And that's our list. Did we miss any Smug movie meta references that you think should have made it? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can even follow me here on Twitter if you fancy. I'm Ben from What Culture, and thanks for watching.